Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be doing my top 19 songs of 2022. If you're wondering why it's 19, I have no idea. I just thought it would be more interesting to see a video that said 19 rather than 20 or 15. Kind of stupid, but before I get started, just want to say thank you for watching any of my videos in the year 2022. This has been kind of the year that I've been starting doing this and taking it somewhat seriously. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, just want to say thank you if you watched any of those videos. I hope you'll stick around and watch some of the new stuff I got for 2023. And besides that, I just want to say I haven't listened to everything. This is going to apply to the albums list that's going to come later too. I haven't listened to everything, and I'd really like to listen to more. I got a playlist of like 3,000 songs. I didn't get to all of them. But if you're wondering, hey, why isn't this here? Leave a comment. Maybe I listened to it and didn't decide to put on the list, or maybe I didn't get to hear it yet and could add it to my list to hear later. So if you got something you want to share, go ahead. I'll definitely respond to you. First track I want to talk about is the track Brothers by Gang of Youth. Gang of Youths. This is a group I had never heard of before listening to this album that it came from. Let me see, just to make sure. The album is Angel in Real Time. I listened to it maybe a month ago or less than a month ago. And, you know, I wasn't really expecting that much, but by the time I got to this track, which is near the second half of the album, I was kind of blown away by the lyrics and, like, his beautiful vocals. If you're looking for a tearjerker and something with just, like, beautiful vocals about fatherhood and family relations, I would really recommend checking this out, as it is beautiful. It's definitely one of the most beautiful tracks I heard all year. And check out the whole album. It's great. I got the track Stress by Conway the Machine. I think this album has really set itself apart from everything else Conway has done. And not to say everything he's done so far hasn't been great. I think he's been getting consistently better each project. But this album was a huge step when it comes to, like, the emotional impact of what Conway is saying, and I think the track Stress is kind of a perfect symbol of that evolution on this album. I don't think we have that many examples that go as far and as personal and get as personal as this track from Conway. So definitely recommend checking out that album, and to see if you like it, maybe give a try to this song first. So next up, we got a banger. We got Crazy by Doechii. She's kind of like the new up-and-comer on TDE, and I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far. She had a couple of really great tracks that went on an EP that came out a little earlier in the year, and lots of bangers. A very diverse group of bangers, but this track in particular, Crazy, is the one that stuck out to me the most, and I definitely recommend checking it out at the gym or on some sort of exciting car ride or something. Definitely recommend checking it out. For that, we got probably my favorite song of the summer, Sunshine by Latto, featuring Lil Wayne and Childish Gambino. It's kind of funny that I love this track so much because the album it comes from, I really was not a fan. I found most of it very bland. But this track is such a bop. It's called Sunshine, so you're expecting it to be applicable to the summer. But Latto has a great verse here. I really like her flow. It's very catchy and fits with the beat. And then Lil Wayne and Childish Gambino, they kind of deliver a similar performance. It definitely feels like Childish Gambino is taking on a Lil Wayne-esque flow, and I think it really works. I think both of them have great verses. No, it's not summer now. Definitely recommend checking it out. After that, I got the track Quicksand by Hatchie. This is an album that I was kind of not really sure about. I had never heard of Hatchie before this year. The album is Giving the World Away, which is a great album overall. But this is kind of the track that stood out for me and I kept coming back to. So I'd recommend checking it out if you're a fan of Dream Pop. Again, this is a summery track, so don't know if it's going to fit so well if you're listening to it when this video comes out. But if you're a fan of that dream pop sound, this album is fantastic. Next up, we got the track History by 070 Shakes. This is a beautiful track. Her debut album, I liked a lot of the tracks, but I don't know if it necessarily gelled completely. There was definitely some duds. Good album, but not great. I will say I think this album that she released this year, You Can't Kill Me, is better. And there are definitely tracks here that show how fantastic her music can be. She's a great vocalist, and she definitely has an ear for very interesting production. This track, History, is probably my favorite from the album because it's just, her vocals are beautiful, and I really like the distortion in the second half of the song. It definitely reminds me of Kanye. Some different eras of his music, probably closest to Ye. That's kind of where she came out. But yeah, really great track. Also recommend the album. It's really great. Next up, we got the track Walkin' by Denzel Curry. I've actually listened to Melt My Eyes, See Your Future a lot, but for whatever reason, even though it's really great, it hasn't stuck with me as much as something like Taboo. Even though it's great, I could definitely see it being considered just as good as Taboo and everything else he's released. But for whatever reason, I haven't gone back to it, or it hasn't clicked with me completely, but I could definitely see it clicking in the future. But this track, Walkin', which was the first Signal release, is fantastic. Production is beautiful. Has one of the most infectious flows and distinct voices in hip-hop. So seeing him evolve has been fantastic. I can't wait to see what he does next. For Walkin', I have Saoko by Rosalia. Motomami it's a complicated relationship I have with that album. I like a lot of it, but a lot of it I feel like doesn't deliver in what I wanted, because I don't know. I wouldn't say a lot of the album is really as similar to Saoko as I was hoping it would be when it came out, because I really love this track. It mixes a lot of the hard-hitting production and hard electronic music from someone like Arca, who has worked with Rosalie in the past. Combines that with the more traditional pop vibe, and I think it creates something really awesome. The rest of the album, you know what, I gotta listen to it more. It's definitely one that didn't get enough attention from me, so I'll hold off on my criticisms of that, but I know this track is fantastic, so definitely recommend checking it out. The next track I got is Lightning by Charlie XCX. Funnily enough, I don't think Crash is going to make my top list for albums that I'm going to do after this, but I had to include it somewhere considering it's one of my most listened to albums of the year, despite my criticisms of it. And I would say Lightning is probably the track that I like the most and I went back to the most. It definitely reminds me of Pop 2 era, and definitely self-titled era too. But you know what, she doesn't have to necessarily stay in that direction, but I am a sucker for it and I really enjoy it. So hearing another track that fits in with that vibe is great. I really enjoy it. So definitely recommend that track. Next up, I got the track Doja by Snot featuring A$AP Rocky. This has probably been like my biggest gym hit of the year. I know a lot of people aren't that crazy about this track. A$AP Rocky's performance is honestly not very great, but I gotta say that hook, Snot's delivery on that hook is amazing, and it's in my rotation for the gym anytime I go to the gym. Next up, I got the track Billions by Caroline Polachek. She's released a couple really great singles this year, but this has been my favorite one by far. It's been one of my most listened to tracks. And the fact that this current grouping of singles that Caroline has released for this upcoming album in February has been so diverse is really cool to me. Completely new and a lot even more grand and ambitious than the stuff on her previous album. So I think if there's more tracks like Billions, I'm going to be really excited for the album. So I got the track Hold the Girl by Rina Sawayama. This is another album from an artist who's one of my favorites, where the album didn't really land with me that well, but there definitely were tracks that did land. The title track from the album, Hold the Girl, was definitely my favorite and one of Rina's best tracks, definitely. Her vocals are fantastic, definitely one of her best vocal performances, and the production is great too. Yeah, especially at the end of the track, her vocals and the claps, it all comes together perfectly. Great track. Next up, I got Mother I Sober by Kendrick Lamar from his album this year, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I wasn't sure which track to pick from the album. I knew I wanted to pick one of them, but Mother I Sober, even just saying the name right there of the track, it gave me chills. It is kind of the climax of the album and definitely one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard and one of the most beautiful songs Kendrick has ever released too. And it definitely earns points for having Beth Gibbons on it, from Portishead. Portishead's a great band if you're into the trip hop sound from the late and early '90s. But just a fantastic track. Next up, I got the track "Neck and Wrist" by Pusha T, featuring Pharrell and Jay-Z, I believe. Yeah, Jay-Z. This track is just so weird, and it's probably amplifies my favorite parts of Pusha T's album from this year, because it's different. It's very different for him. The production from Pharrell is really weird and different than I would hear from him too. He's definitely stretching himself out to do something new. I really like Push's flow on this because it's not what you would expect from him. It's very stretched out, I would say. His flow stretched out, and he's delivering kind of this very humorous vocal performance. But it all works together to create something that feels like something I've never heard before. And yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out that album too, because there are definitely a lot of examples of Pusha T stretching himself to do something new and exciting. So I believe we're at the top 5 now. This next track I got is "Good Will Hunting" by Black Country New Road. Spoiler alert, I really love that album. I won't spoil as to where it's going to place on the list. But I was looking at the tracks and I was trying not to pick something that released last year. So I went with "Good Will Hunting" despite the fact I love the whole album. "Good Will Hunting" was one that led me to tears, definitely, on certain listens of this album. It's beautiful. I will have more to say about it in the albums list, the album overall. But yeah, great track. Definitely one of the highest points on an album full of high points. Next up, I got the track "Tears in the Club." Now, I know I just, by FKA Twigs, I know I just said like 5 seconds ago that I wanted to pick songs that released this year, even if the album, I wanted to pick songs from albums that came out this year and songs that released this year instead of a single from an album that when the single came out last year. I don't think I explained that well. Whatever. But this track, "Tears in the Club," it came out in December of last year, but a majority of my listens were this year, so I think it's okay for me to include this year. Especially since it's one of my most listened to tracks of the year. FKA Twigs and The Weeknd flow off each other really well in creating this kind of... It definitely feels like a track that fits in with The Weeknd's catalog in the earlier part of the 2010s, in that it's this atmospheric R&B. And the title just perfectly fits "Tears in the Club." I think that phrase perfectly fits The Weeknd. And I think FKA Twigs on this album, the album that this song comes from, kind of embraces that feeling by creating a much more pop-oriented album than her previous work. And I think this track is my favorite from that album. It hits all the right notes, and I definitely recommend it. Next up, we got the track "Venus Flytrap" by Breakins. Breakins? I think that's how you pronounce it. Another spoiler for the album list. This has been my breakout artist of the year. Venus Flytrap was the track that introduced me to his music, and I was instantly blown away. I was like, wow, this fits so many boxes that no other artist is fitting for me. I love the hyperpop sound, and I really love clean production. I love glitchy production. So Breakins kind of combines all of those things on his album, which I'll talk about more on the album list, the whole album, but this track in particular was the one that introduced me to him, and it's the one I've come back to the most, and it's a fantastic pop track. I definitely recommend it. We got the top 2. Next up, we got another track with The Weeknd. My favorite track from his album this year, "Out of Time." This is definitely one I came back to so many times. The vibe of it is perfect. I didn't love Dawn FM as much as a lot of other people because I didn't think the album was as consistent as this track or as After Hours. But this track, I certainly love. It samples the track "Midnight Pretenders" by Tomoko Aran. It's an 80s city pop track, and it definitely feels like a lot of it is completely taken and put in the Out of Time track, but I do think it does its own thing to make it stand out. The Weeknd's performance on this track is fantastic. He owns the beat completely. And I think the production changes, they're minor and subtle, but they're still great, I would say. I think they really add to this track to make it its own thing, and definitely one of my favorite tracks of the year. Now, my top track of the year is After the Earthquake by Alvvays. This track also kind of came out of nowhere for me. I've always been a fan. I've always been a fan of Alvvays, haha. But this year in particular, I really started to realize how fantastic their discography is. And it was a good time for that to happen because they were releasing their first album in a long time this year. And this album did everything they did before, and this track in particular did everything they did before, but added this emotional sadness to it in a lot of ways. And this track kind of is the culmination of all of that. Everything that was going into this album, I think, is shown on this track. Not only is the first half a fantastic Alvvays dream pop track, it's catchy, lyrics are great, but I think really where the track stands out is the sudden breakdown in the second half, where the vocals come through on their own, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a song that's made me cry plenty of times now, just because of how beautiful those vocals are, and then kind of the follow-up to that that section that is just vocals is an absolutely fantastic conclusion to the song. Definitely my favorite song of the year, the one I've listened to probably the most, and a track I cannot say more. I could go on forever talking about how much I love this track. Probably my favorite song from Alvvays as well, and I think that's saying a lot. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed my list. If you have any songs you want to know my thoughts on, put it in the comments, and if I haven't heard it, I'll give it a listen and let you know, or if I have, I'll tell you what I think about it. Yeah, so thank you guys for watching. Look forward to the album list, which will come very soon, and have a nice day, guys.